Don't know. Don't know. I've been flying up here for 2,000 years.
Shalom, this is Hakam Yar ben-Emmett again with an exciting topic of interest series hosted by none other, the Torah Watchman Show International Company. I've missed you so much. I have a very interesting video, I believe. It's geared toward Christians. But anyone is interested in a Christian philosophical, theological belief would probably be drawn to this too. Unfortunately, a lot of Jews do not understand Christianity the way I learned in college and things of this nature, because I opened my mind to all belief systems around the world so I can understand what I'm dealing with. Many Jews are concerned about Christians coming to them and trying to baptize them in the name of their Lord Jesus, or trying just to confuse them because they are secular and don't have any kind of belief, and they can be easily swayed over to the messianic Christian belief. But anyway, there's a topic that is of interest going back a long time ago. It is the time is unknown for the second coming of Jesus. Now, Jesus is believed by every Christian on the planet as the promised Messiah, not only to the Gentiles and Christians, but to the Jews. The Jews got it wrong because they rejected Jesus, and then Jesus was crucified. And of course, the Jews have been cursed since then, according to their belief and own scholars and the Vatican and everything else, that we are the Christ killers. But anyway, what happens when your Messiah does not complete all the prophecies that were foretold in the Old Testament, like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and other things like this? Well, he gets a second chance to make it right. So the Messiah can come back a second time and do everything right in a grand finale, entertain the world, per se. Who does not like the idea of a supernatural being coming from the clouds in heaven and then extending their arms out to all the dead and everything else, and then resurrecting them and have them flying up in peace with heaven, amen? Well, this is this storytelling that is so trying to say obnoxious, in that people really are gravitated to this. I admit the Gospels are great stories. There's been many movies like The Passion of Christ and Mel Gibson, all this. But take it from Jesus' own mouth, as told in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is a book in the New Testament Bible, one of the four synoptic Gospels. It is written anonymously, probably around 80 or 85 Common Era, about the same time the Gospel of Luke was written. But according to Christian scholars, the Roman Catholic Church and others, and this foundational Christian pastors and missionaries of time, like John Calvin, Martin Luther, well, they believe very roundly that the book of Matthew was written by the disciple of Jesus, Matthew, even though it was written anonymously decades, almost 100 years after he died. Okay? So in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, Jesus said, or was told to have said, or counted to have said back in his time. Okay? And the disciples were asking, they were insatiable in their questions of Jesus. They're all that he was there. He represented everything they were hoping for all this time, to correct all the wrongs against them, to remove the Roman occupiers out of Judea and restore Israel to its former glory. They were looking for messiahs under every stone. They believed Jesus because he was a man of peace, and he had many convincing things. He's a great orator, and told them exactly what they wanted to believe in. Anyway, the disciples were asking Jesus about when is the end of the age. They already were informed by Jesus that soon the Son of Man had to be carried away and then crucified and leave, and they were terrified of that. He said, what are we going to do about this? He said, well, I'll come back. He said, what do you mean? The second coming, redemption, all of this? Well, Jesus said this, concerning that day or hour, I don't know.
Don't know. Don't know.
No one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor me, of the Son of Man, but only the Father, the King of the universe, the God of Moses. Okay, no one knows the end of times, the apocalypse, the time of Jesus' second coming. He said this very clearly. And in this one little verse, he denied all of his divinity of people saying the triune Godhead, he was equal to God in the flesh. Well, he said, I don't have that godly knowledge. I do not know that. Well, was he speaking honestly? I don't know. The disciples were still bewildered about this because they were still concerned. They had emotional attachments, psychological attachments to Jesus. They didn't want to let him go because they had nothing to believe in other than him. So, yes, early Christians definitely, including figures like the famous Apostle Paul, wrote the 13 epistles, the letters to the many cities in Greece and Asia Minor at the time. He expected Jesus' return to be within his lifetime, or which is known as a generation. 2,000 years ago, that was about 25 years. That's all people lived. That's all people lived back then. So the passages of his letters he wrote in the New Testament has that in his context of his life, the way he lived his life, what he was preparing for. Okay, even though he was under a lot of persecution, supposedly, and trials and tribulation, he still had that belief within him that the imminent return of Jesus Christ. Of course, Jesus had been killed, the disciples had died by the time he wrote his letters, and that was around 50 CE. Okay, now the imminent return, many scholars, many Christian scholars, early Christians like the Essenes and the Christians that followed, they were known as the fishermen of men. They had a little Pisces fish per se, symbol. They didn't have a crucifix or anything like that. They were lived in the hope of Jesus' return. They believed in that ardently. Okay, and that they believed again in their generation. A generation is 25 years. If you ever go into any ancestral genealogical websites, you'll learn that fast that your fifth great grandmother lived at 125 years ago. That's how they base it, because people only lived about 25 years 2,000 years ago. Of course, we live much longer now. Okay, so with that being said, there are some certain New Testament passages, and we'll get into this in a moment. This expectation is reflected in the various New Testament passages, such as Paul's writing in First Thessalonians. This is a letter that Paul allegedly wrote to the church of Thessalonica in Greece, okay, where he assures believers, don't worry, that those who have died, and many people had died at that time, they lost church members for various reasons. There was disease, there's pestilence, famine, of course, war, and things like this nature. And he comforted them that if you have a mother, a father, a brother, sister who had died before you, they would be the first one to be resurrected when the Son of Man returns in the clouds. Okay, so Paul's perspective of his writing again was very ardent, very clear that Jesus returned in his own lifetime. He comforted many of these churches followers and people he wrote these letters to all the different churches along the Mediterranean coast, to comfort them. Don't worry about your trials and tribulation day, but Jesus is going to return in our generation. He did never specify a date. Okay, the Gospel, Mark's Gospel, the author of Mark, whoever that was, an anonymous author writing these books in Koine Greek. The Gospel of Mark was instantly written about 67 CE, right up to the destruction of King Herod's temple, okay, in Judea. Now, he wrote also about the imminent return of Jesus on clouds of glory. He spoke of this, that Jesus returned on clouds of glory. This comes from the prophet Daniel, chapter 9, chapter 10, in that area, and it's grossly a misinterpretation about this, okay? It comes from Jewish folklore, in the Talmudic writings, things like that, that our Messiah will either come in one of two ways. He'll come on a humble donkey into the Messiah gate, which is closed right now in Jerusalem, or he will come supernaturally in the clouds of heaven because Israel has already redeemed themselves. They already repaired things in their life, and they were righteously waiting on the Messiah. It just depends. It's just a different outlook. But they, again, every angel, every Messiah in the Old Testament is always Jesus. Now, the context of persecution. When you're being persecuted, trials and tribulation, you just lost your baby son, right? Your son died. It's only you've been trying 5 years or more to have a child, and you're up in years now, and your son died. That is a trial and tribulation. Also, people dying from the plague and other things like this. A simple wound, like from a robber or something, stabs you. Well, it becomes a massive infection because you don't have antibiotics during that time, and people had flu-like virus and things like that, and they died too. People died so many ways during that time, and they looked at the worldwide conflict of the countries in conflict. The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was very great in their time, and they didn't think it was going away anytime soon. Surely not going away in their generation. So they were facing persecution. So they had emotions driving them that time to believe in any kind of hope. If someone, even a snake's oil salesman, would come to them and tell them something that sounds good, sounds great, sounds different than anything they heard before, they'll probably gravitate toward that and become a disciple of Jesus, or AKA a Christian. Now, in latter development, Christians have changed their approach toward the second coming. I will explain this. Now, the expectation of immediate return was very strong throughout Christian biblical history. I already discussed this. The church later developed a more nuanced understanding, so more common sense, compromising, trying to explain why it's been 2,000 years since Jesus said he was coming back in the generation of disciples, while the timing and nature of the second coming, the estimation before and the people predicting the end of the world, like Jehovah's Witnesses and things of this nature, other false messiahs, and the world is coming to the end soon. Year 2000, the millennia people, when the millennia time, when you thought if your clock or your computer would stop working around the world, if you hit the year 2000, because at that time it was just 2 digits for the year. So I remember all of this. So people believe whatever they believe in, and some people make more convincing arguments than others, okay? But not everyone can be a leader. Most people are followers. So what does the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, believe on this? You'll be surprised. I remember this in the news outlets. They deny it now. These were discussions. I'll give you a brief synopsis from 2014 to about 2016. They commented that 2,000 years ago, Jesus promised his disciples that he would come again in Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 1 through 3 in the Bible, the Christian Bible. And then, quote, there are many homes up where my Father lives, chambers, houses, apartments, mansions, whatever, enclaves and places that Jesus said, I'm going up to heaven. I'm going to prepare a place for you. Going to have a place with your name on it. You don't have to worry about anything that you can. I'm preparing this. I have to die. I have to ascend in heaven to make this come true. Okay. So you have to let go of me for a brief time, but I'm coming back and I'm going to heaven to prepare a place for you. This is very comforting when you have nothing else to believe in, especially if you're not Jewish. Now, he said, when everything is ready, then he will come and get you so that you can always be with me where I am. So where I am, Jesus saying, where I am, the Father is too. And I'm at the right hand of the throne of God. He said this and everything else. It really aggravated the Pharisees and the priests at that time when he said that. And they threatened to stone him over this because it was just blasphemy. But anyway, he said that and he told his disciples this, and they believed him. They believed him because supposedly Jesus was a miracle worker. Every time he went down the street, he transformed water to wine. He resurrected Lazarus. He healed the sick. He healed the cripple, the blind, all this. He did all these miracles. Supposedly walked on the Galilee for Peter to come out to him. All these epic stories and everything else. So supposedly he did these supernatural works and miracles, to be able to entice his people to follow him and believe what he was saying. Now, the Vatican essentially said that this was a broken promise made by Jesus in an inopportune moment. In other words, they said he was probably drinking too much wine at that time, and he made his comment. When you're numered, even rabbis, you're numered, you do things that you would not normally say or do if you were not drunk. So they said this off the cuff remark, and I wonder about cognitive dissonance and what they really believed at that time. But they have denied this in time of Pope Francis at this time, Pope John Paul. I may have said mistakenly in 2014 timeframe. Pope Francis denies this in the Vatican. In fact, they've taken those websites down that had that, and they said these people were not speaking on behalf of the Catholic Church, even though these were bishops. They were speaking their mind and answering the questions that the disciples asked Jesus. When is Jesus coming back? Okay. I think there's something like 28, 29 wars going on throughout the planet. All this trial and tribulation you won't deliver to come and make things right? So in conclusion, how do Christians really feel about the second coming of Jesus? You would be surprised. There was a survey in 2010 that was taken. About 40% of Americans believe that Jesus is likely to return by 2050. Why 2050? I'm not sure. This varies from 58% of white evangelical Christian through 32% of Catholic, to 27% of white mainline Protestant. So you have the evangelicals are more orthodox in their faith. So most of them believe, 48% believe in the second coming of Jesus, but it goes down to Catholics, about 27%, and it goes down to mainline Protestants, which is every other thing, like the Southern Baptists, anything not Catholic, like Lutheran, Methodist, Episcopalian. Okay? So the belief in the second coming was popularized in the U.S. in the late 19th century. Evangelist by the name of Dwight L. Moody, he's a historical figure, well known, and he pushed the premillennial interpretation of Jesus coming and with a timeline per se. And fortunately, some of these Christians went as far as saying, well, the church will eventually replace Israel in the covenantal promises that God gave and made. So this became one of the core components of Christian fundamentalism by the 1920s. In the 1980s, I remember this well, there was a evangelist too, I don't know his credentials, Hal Lindsey. I don't think he was a pastor. He was definitely into eschatology. Anyway, he wrote a book, a series of books, The Great Planet Earth. He talked about the war that would end all wars. He talked about the end of time. He talked about in his generation, he believed this happened. He sold millions of books, but by the time he was dead in the grave, Jesus hadn't returned. So many people are still Christian, are still looking for their Messiah to return, Jesus. Now, what do the Jews think about this? Well, there's no second coming of a Messiah, and it's not at all in the Torah, 5 books of Torah, the books of the prophets and Navim, or the second writing. It's not in the Jewish Bible about a second coming. We talk about the Messiah as a Mashiach today. We give names. Is also known as the Prince of King David, and Ezekiel is referred to that very well. Isaiah was very clear on the requirements of the Messiah. You would know the Messiah when the time when all the world is acknowledging the words of truth of God. So the knowledge of God will be perpetuated through every heart and mind on the planet, and that will cease all war and conflict. So when wars cease and come to an end, and there's peace being established, and Israel's defending themselves against all kinds of adversaries, you know that the end is coming and the Messiah will present himself. This is what the Bible says, the Jewish Bible says. We're not waiting for Jesus, the second coming. We're not waiting for anything that the New Testament says to be true. That's just the way it is. So I thought this was interesting. I thought it was noteworthy to bring this out, that, people believe what they want to believe, essentially. There's a lot of psychology with this, and people's beliefs wane and ebb over a period of time. People that lived during right after Jesus' death followed his teaching, like the Essenes, the poor ones of that time, the followers of the fish, fishermen, be fishermen of men, like Jesus said to Peter and others about, he gave him a miracle about catching fish and everything else. Well, they used that fish in place of a crucifix later on in the developed Roman Catholic Church. But they believed in this in their generation. Every group of Christians that lived 2,000 years ago and on, when they heard about the good news from Apostle Paul and others, they believed that Jesus would come imminently because they looked at the world. Because Jesus said in a time of great unrest, and Paul said this in 1 Thessalonians, time of great unrest, that that Jesus will be coming back very near, as the birth pains of a pregnant mother. When the fig tree makes figs, the end is near. It's just taking things from my Bible and adding a little bit flavor and a lot of imagination to that, to be able to convince the Christian that whoever the writers were of the four Gospels, we don't know, and I believe in what Apostle Paul as the gospel, the good news of that time. They would believe that ardently, and they would hold true to their faith no matter how many people died in their family before Jesus returned. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hakam Yara ben-Emmett signing out till next time. God bless you. Shalom Aleichem. If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.